The Judicial Service Commission has finished its interviews for a position on the Constitutional Court, but again has not been able to send a list of 4 people to the President for him to pick one person. The Constitution says the JSC must send 3 more names than there are available positions. There was just 1 position on the court. Only 4 people accepted a nomination, which meant the JSC either had to send through all 4 names or send through no names. In the end, it sent through no names, which means it believes at least one of the candidates is not suitable for appointment. Chris Oxtoby is a research consultant for Freedom Under Law. Chris, good afternoon to you. Do we know at this stage what happened in the meeting, why the JSC decided not to send any names through?
So I think it was apparent during the interviews that the candidacy of Professor Bilchers, who was the first candidate to be interviewed, raised some concerns for many of the commissioners, and I think when it came to deliberations, it was certainly an open question as to whether or not all 4 candidates would get the votes to go forward. So I think it's a fairly clear inference from how that interview went. From some of the concerns that were raised, that it was an issue with that candidate in particular that caused the problem. It's unfortunate. Well, it's unfortunate for many reasons. One of which being that the Chief Justice had made this much heralded effort to try and broaden the pool of candidates from which we draw potential Constitutional Court judges. And he'd extended that to academics and to practicing lawyers, and Professor Bilchers had been invited to act on the court as from his academic background. And unfortunately, there seemed to be a lot of concerns about the extent of his adjudicative experience, because he'd only been acting on the court for a short time, hadn't yet written any judgments. So that's really, I think, where the crux of the problem came.
It would, of course, been easier if there had been 6, 7, 8 people accepted for nomination to the Constitutional Court, and people don't accept nominations. Does the JSC need to change? I mean, is it the JSC that is creating this situation? And I mean, I can understand why someone who's an accomplished person may not want to go through a public interview and not be interviewed, I hate to say this, be interviewed by politicians.
Yeah, I'm afraid it does become more and more an irresistible inference that is at least a major part of the problem. If we think over the last 2 or 3 years, the JSC has twice had interviews for positions in the highest courts challenged in court, and has in fact conceded those challenges, and has conceded that their process has been defective, rather than being able to even defend the process they followed in court. I'm thinking of the 2021 Constitutional Court interviews, which CASAC challenged, and then the interviews October last year for the Supreme Court of Appeal, which Freedom Under Law challenged. And that points, I think, to some serious problems in process, in how candidates are treated, and the fairness of the interviews. It's really very difficult to argue that is not at least a very major and significant component of what the problem is. So the short answer to the first part of your question is yes. I think the JSC does need to change, and the frustrating part is that there have been steps that have been taken. They announced a set of, I think, really quite good written criteria at the end of 2022. But the practice in the interviews doesn't really seem to be following those, and the interviews are still remaining problematic. And of course, they're conducted in the full public gaze, and I can very much understand that the candidates would be hesitant to put themselves forward with the potential reputational damage and public spectacle that comes with that.
Being a judge in South Africa right now, Chris, I mean, it's an interesting space, right? On one level, you have quite a lot of power. I mean, you make decisions that really matter. We've all spent the last few days talking about the Electoral Court. That's just one example of that. On the other hand, you lose some of your power. You can't ever really speak in public. You have to behave in a particular way. And everyone still has the power to shout at you because they don't like your judgments. The other thing is that if you are a judge, financially, you will get paid the same salary for the rest of your life. Now, that's very attractive. Top advocates will get paid a lot more than that, of course. So is the job of being a judge, even on the Constitutional Court, actually that attractive?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the issues that we heard discussed at great length during the interviews was the very serious challenges that the Constitutional Court is facing in terms of its workload. That since its jurisdiction has been extended to become a court of more general jurisdiction rather than a specialist constitutional court, the court is now seemingly getting swamped with applications to hear further appeals. And it quite frankly doesn't sound like it's coping with that. The court handed down, I understand today, its first substantive judgment for the entire year, which is a remarkably long time for the court to have taken to deliver a judgment, and it points to a court that's under serious pressure. So I think the workload concerns for very many judges in many of the courts, not just the Constitutional Court, is a very serious concern. And there are other issues as well, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, not least of which is the resources and working conditions that the judges are expected to perform this really important role under. And we've seen survey results over the last few years highlighting, serious issues with infrastructure, with the administrative functioning of the courts, which judges somehow have to find a way of working around in order to give these really important and consequential decisions. So it's a really tough job. I don't envy any of our judges, quite honestly. And that does make it important that we keep watching these kind of processes, and we argue for their lives to be made a little bit easier, frankly.
Chris Oxtoby, thank you very much indeed. Research consultant at Freedom Under Law. Really do appreciate the time.